is joining me now. Congressman French Hill, he was also Deputy Assistant Secretary of Treasury under President Bush. Thank you so much, Congressman, for being with us, and condolences for the loss of your personal friend.
Thanks, Anna.
You met the former president.
A great American.
So true. You met him almost 40 years ago, back in 1979. How are you remembering your friend today?
I'm remembering, in those clips you just showed and Jamie's reporting, I just loved his goofy sense of humor. I loved it, and I couldn't get enough of it. He had the best sense of humor. He made people at ease. It was part of his beautiful sense of personal diplomacy, whether he was working a deal on Capitol Hill or around the world building a coalition. That humor, that warmth, that personal diplomacy is what I remember the best.
You worked with him in many capacities, shared many moments. We're seeing some of the photos of you two together. Do you have a favorite story?
Oh gosh, I have so many, but you know, I loved his, as I say, his sense of humor. I think one of the things he brought people together, lifted their spirits. He loved caring for others, as 43 just said. And after the loss, he invited all the officers of the White House to come to the East Room for an important meeting at 10:30 in the morning. And when we got in the East Room and we were seated, the offstage announcer said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President and Mrs. Bush." And in walked Dana Carvey, holding Mrs. Bush's hands, doing his best 41 impression. And that was George Bush, classic 41, lifting the spirits of the whole White House staff after his loss in 1992.
We see him in a great photo, the big, just gregarious laughter you can almost hear looking at this image. I'm wondering how you and him ended up getting to know each other.
Well, it's an interesting story. Back in 1979, I was invited by my friend Gene Tower Cox of Dallas, Texas, to participate in a young person's fundraiser for this guy from Houston, Texas, named George Bush, who was going to run for president. And we did a picnic, and I got to meet him then. And then a few short years later, totally by coincidence, I went to work for Gene Tower Cox's dad, Senator John Tower of Texas, on the U.S. Senate Banking Committee as a staffer. And from there, I got to know the Vice President and Mrs. Bush, and it began really a lifelong admiration of the Bush family and President Bush's great mentorship and friendship.
When was the last time you spoke to him, and do you remember that conversation? What was it?
I got to see him very briefly at 43's library opening, and he was just having so much fun at President Bush's library opening at SMU in Dallas. He gave this very short little tribute, thanking everybody for coming, leaned over to 43 and said, "How was it?" 43 said, "Fine." He says, 41 says, "Was it too short? Too long?" I mean, just he kept that sense of humor at every step of the game.
In every chapter of his life, he really was a public servant in some way, from his time in the military to his service as a congressman, a vice president, up through the presidency. And he was really in it for all the right reasons. He wasn't afraid to put his political neck out there. Why aren't there more people like him in politics today?
Well, he's absolutely the epitome of public service. In the Rotary Club, Rotary International, we say service above self is our motto. And that perfectly describes George Bush from the time he enlisted in the Navy until just yesterday. George always put himself at the service of others, for his country, for his family. It's what I admire about him. The Points of Light effort continues to this day. It was institutionalized by his successor, Bill Clinton, in the progress of AmeriCorps, where we encourage volunteerism across this country. And so George Bush has left a great legacy of volunteer spirit and that service above self.
What do you see as his greatest political accomplishment?
Oh gosh, this is what's so amazing. George Bush had a very successful one-term presidency. The Americans for Disability Act was revolutionary at the time, and it's offered opportunity and accessibility for millions and millions of Americans across this country. His Clean Air Act amendments were an amazing work on clean air and clean water when he was president. Of course, the coalition to reject Saddam Hussein from Kuwait was an amazing international accomplishment that really, when you think about the coalition aspect of that, it's unparalleled really in American history. So for me, I think the most important thing was his very careful stewardship of uniting Germany and keeping Germany in NATO after the Berlin Wall fell. This was a very touchy time between the Soviet Union and the United States, and Jim Baker and General Scowcroft and George Bush are owed a long-standing debt of gratitude from the whole world for their very careful reassembly of Germany and keeping Germany a part of Europe and a part of NATO.
Congressman